World Book Day, a little bit different this year, but hey, stories are stories. For what it's worth, I thought I'd give you my top 3 children's stories at the moment. This one has moved into the number 1 slot. It's called the Nowhere Emporium, and I am boring anybody who will stand still long enough for me to talk to them about it because I think it's wonderful. Genuinely exciting, genuinely hasn't had a single boring chapter. I'm halfway through reading it with years 5 and 6, so I can't even say how it's going to end, but I'm sure it will be absolutely fine, or a cliffhanger, one of the two. So that's my number 1 at the moment. My number 2 is a book that I don't have here at home with me. It's called Boy in the Tower, and it's actually a sci-fi book, and there aren't so many sci-fi books for children, so I think that's rather wonderful. And our main protagonist lives in a tower block, hence Boy in the Tower, and action doesn't actually move very far from there, so I think it's very, very clever. Is this my 3rd? Maybe. I love this book because it is full of action. It's written by Chris Columbus, the American film director. So it is absolutely action-packed. It's a little bit scary. There is an awful lot of adventure in it. I would say it's for years 5 and 6 certainly. Year 4, if they can talk to a grown-up about it, if they get a little bit frightened around the edges. It is full of action. The first couple of chapters are that thing where the author's getting you used to the characters and aren't so exciting. Now, given I don't have that long to read to you, I don't want to read you the bits that aren't that exciting. So I'm just going to tell you what happens in those bits. So in those bits, we meet a family with 3 children, and the children are called Brendan, and he's 15, and Cordelia, who is 12, and Eleanor, who is 8. And they live with their mum and dad is a surgeon, but something mysterious has happened and gone wrong with his job, and something terrible happened, and nobody's quite sure why yet. You do know by the end of the book. So they have to move. They have to leave their home they've always lived in, and they're looking for a new home. And they are shown this house in San Francisco by the Golden Gate Bridge. And it's a house they shouldn't be able to afford. But for some reason, it's being sold at quite a low price to the right buyer. Okay, so I'm just going to set us up with that's what's happening at the beginning. And I took the little post-it notes out. That was rather silly. So they're going to go and see the house, and they're in the car, and they're going there, and the children are arguing with each other, and all the things that normally happens. And he's playing on like a switch, the older brother, and not really listening to his sisters. And they're coming up to the house now. "What's that?" Eleanor exclaimed. Brendan and Cordelia glanced over in time to see a figure streaking from one of the pine trees to the side of the house, a flash of shadow, too fast to be a person. A car honked on Seacliff Avenue behind them. "Probably just the car's shadow now," said Brendan, jumping from the tree to the house. "No, it wasn't. It was a person, and it was bald," insisted Eleanor. "You saw a bald guy, girl, an old woman staring at us, and now she's behind the house." Brendan and Cordelia glanced at each other, each expecting the other to be making a silly Eleanor face, but actually they were both as deadly serious as their sister. They looked at the side of Christoph House. The silhouette of a dark figure stood there, watching them. Christoph House is the house they are buying. Remember that name. Brendan took a deep breath and tried to stay calm, strong. The figure remained still. "Hello," he called, stepping off the path and pulling Eleanor with him. Cordelia followed behind. "Is someone there?" The figure was nothing but an old statue, a Gothic angel looming 2 meters tall, carved from grey stone, stained with streaks of green and black. It had wings folded behind it and arms stretched forward with the right hand broken off. Its face was worn down, chinless and lipless, eroded by decades of San Francisco wind and fog. Mossy patches covered its eyes. "Beautiful," said Cordelia. Brendan wiped his forehead, surprised to find it covered in sweat. It was stupid. But he'd expected to see the person Eleanor had described, a bald woman, a crone. His imagination ran away with him a little, and he could even picture this woman pointing a crooked finger and hissing, "Here are the suckers who will finally buy this house." "See now, it's just a statue. There's no one here," Brendan said, putting his hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "She went somewhere." "It was a trick the light played on you." "No, it didn't." "Let it go." "You're scared." "Not as scared as you," said Eleanor, moving Brendan's hand away and pointing at the sweaty spot he had left on her shoulder. Before Brendan could protest, another hand reached out and grabbed his neck. That's the end of the chapter. So a little cliffhanger. I'm going to let you know that was just his dad. Nothing to worry about at all. So they go into the house and they're looking around the house, and it's a beautiful house. It's got a grand hallway with statues in. It's got a library absolutely full of books. There's no way this house should be being sold for the price it is being sold for. Something is wrong. Okay, so they go into the house. I'm not going to read you all of this part. Okay, so upstairs, a broad hallway ran the length of the house, ending at a bay window, and another smaller staircase led down to the great hall. The wall featured old portraits in colour with a faded pastel tint. In one, a grim-faced man with a square beard stood next to a lady in a frilled dress gripping a buggy. In the next, the same lady looked over her shoulder on a wharf as men in newsboys' caps looked at her. In a third, an elderly woman sat beneath a tree holding a baby in a dress and a bonnet. The Christoph family, Diane explained, noting Brendan and Cordelia's fascination. That's Denver Christoph, the man with the square beard, his wife Eliza May, and his mother, the woman under the tree with the baby. I forget her name. Anyway, the pictures are just for show. When you move in, if you move in, you can put up pictures of your family. Brendan tried to imagine Walker photos on the wall. Okay, so I'm going to skip again just a little bit. And here we go. So the house is too cheap, but they decide, yes, they are going to buy it. So now they're going back to the car. As his family walked out of the front door, Brendan headed down the pebble path. He split off and ran to the Stone Angel, pulling out his phone to take another picture. He'd put his arm around the thing and grin and show the world he wasn't frightened of a hunk of rock with moss accents. Oh, except the Stone Angel wasn't there. Brendan suppressed the urge to call out. Maybe he was just confused. Maybe it was on the other side of the house. But no, he remembered the broken hand was the right hand, and it was a few inches from the exterior wall. So who moved the statue? Brendan knelt to investigate, but it was as though the statue had never been there. There was no imprint. Suddenly a face appeared, inches from Brendan's own, hissing, its voice like a swarm of wasps leaving hell. You don't belong here. She was a bone-white old woman, as tall as the Stone Angel, bald, with cracked lips pulled back over brown teeth. She stared at Brendan with glistening steel-blue eyes. She wore dirty layers of rags and no shoes. The toenails were amber. That's like a dark orange colour, encrusted with soil. She was the crone that Brendan had feared, but 100 times worse, and when she spoke, her breath was more foul than 6-month-old compost. Leave this place. She wrapped her hand around Brendan's wrist. It felt like a rope. He tried to pull away, but she held him fast. And then she looked into his eyes. Who are you? She asked more quietly. But Brendan Walker, he said. Walker? She repeated. Brendan had never been so scared. Not scared stiff, beyond that, scared into action, like someone had shot a spike of adrenaline into his back. He twisted, wrested his hand from her and ran, spit flying out of the side of his mouth. Mum! Dad! Surely they'd seen him. She was a 6-foot baldy with the body mass index of a skeleton. She'd be tough to miss. He reached his family back at the Toyota after running across the lawn, which suddenly seemed to be the size of a football field. Bren, what's wrong? Are you okay? You guys didn't... Brendan looked back. There was nothing to be seen. The woman was gone. Okay, so, Brendan tries to tell himself that he's making up, that nothing's going on, that, this is all in his imagination, and, this was just a homeless lady who perhaps wasn't very well. Tries to convince himself it's all okay. Clearly it's not all okay, otherwise we wouldn't have a story, would we? So, the Walkers move into this beautiful house, beautiful house that, they probably shouldn't really be able to move into with everything that's gone on with Dad and the weird thing. Okay, so all of a sudden, chapter 10, Brendan comes downstairs and in the hall is the old woman. What are you doing here? Brendan demanded, brandishing his lacrosse stick like a 2-handed axe. A lacrosse stick, a bit like a hockey stick, not quite, but that sort of thing. It's a sports thing. The old crone turned to face him. She wasn't dressed in dirty rags anymore. She wore a loose polka-dot dress and a floral bandana that hid her baldness. Her teeth were freshly cleaned and polished, almost white. She carried an apple pie in her left hand. Her right was tucked into her dress pocket. What's wrong, son? You seem troubled. Think about it. Why is her hand tucked into her pocket? Brendan gritted his teeth. You bet I'm troubled. Now drop the pie, put your hands over your head and get out of our house. Brendan, give me that stick immediately, his father ordered. Dad, this old bag's evil and I'll bet she spiked that pie with arsenic. You are playing too many video games. Hand over the stick. Silence gripped the room. Brendan gulped and gave his dad the stick. Now apologise, ordered his mother. Brendan took a deep breath, refusing to make eye contact with the old woman, and said, sorry. You're more than sorry. You're grounded for a month. You can't just threaten people, said his father. Not sure she's a person, Brendan mumbled. Bren, Cordelia said. She was introducing herself. She's our new next-door neighbour. Great. I apologise for my son's unconscionable behaviour, said Dr. Walker. Brendan, go to your room. We'll discuss this shortly. Ma'am, we never had a chance to get your name. Dahlia Christoph, the old crone said, and please don't worry about your son. I understand about young boys, especially these days. So many stimuli. Are you related to Denver Christoph, the writer? Cordelia asked. He's my father. Was your father, Brendan thought as he mounted the back stairs, unless he's like 200. I'm a fan, Cordelia said. She held up her copy of The Fighting Ace. So nice to meet a fellow bibliophile. Did you get that from my father's library? Cordelia nodded, a little embarrassed, but then again, it was her library now. It's in that house. I remember when he finished it. I was born here. There we go. So we found out a little bit more. And you know, she's making out that she's this lovely lady, and oh yes, it's nice to meet you. So, this part's interesting. Have a listen to this. You guys aren't being fair. She's obviously not really Christoph's daughter. He built this house in 1907, so she'd be 100. If she was born here, she could be as old as 106. And you should see what she looks like before she takes a shower, Brendan said. She was a little creepy, Mrs. Walker said. I don't like the idea she used to live here. Don't worry, it'll sort itself out. Dr. Walker put an arm around his wife. Let's just be thankful the move is over and get dinner. And they decide they're going to get pizza delivered and, watch a film and have a lovely family evening. So they settle down, but then all of a sudden the doorbell goes. Dahlia Christoph stepped in swiftly. She wore her polka-dot dress, but no hat or shoes this time. She was completely bald. Dr. Walker drew back from her splotchy red skull and yellow toes. Excuse me, hello, miss? You can't come in my house. Shut up, Dahlia hissed, striding toward the living room. Dr. Walker followed, pulling out his phone to dial 911, but suddenly the phone jumped from his hand. It flew through the air and cracked against a bust as if it had been snatched up by a powerful gust of wind. When Dr. Walker retrieved it, it wouldn't turn on. Dad, who was it? Brendan called, but instead of his father, Dahlia Christoph stepped into the room. He froze. My God, Mrs. Walker said, what are you doing here? How dare you barge into our home? How dare you consider this your home? Dahlia shrieked, and then the transformation began. It was like an IMAX film, 3D, but way better, or way worse. The old crone threw her hands up. Just as he had suspected, her right hand ended in a knobby stump. Dahlia arched her back, stretching as if to crack the bones in her spine, and then 2 grey wings sprang from the neck of her dress. Brendan was terrified, stunned, and amazed all at once. All he could think was, I'm not going to let this freak hurt me, and I'm not going to let her hurt my family. Dahlia Christoph wings unfurled behind her to spread across the room. They weren't like angel wings. They were dusty and greasy looking, filling the air with the stench of rot. Mum, what's happening? Eleanor cried. I don't know, honey, Mrs. Walker said, grabbing her youngest with one hand and the cross around her neck with the other. Dahlia laughed, a breathy cackle, a skeleton's laugh. Get out! Dr. Walker yelled, crashing into the room, but the crone swung a wing and slammed him across the back, knocking him into the piano with a cacophonous dong. Brendan tried to run for a weapon, but now Dahlia was flapping her wings, whipping the air up in the house, keeping him off balance. Something horrible was happening to her face. The fine blue veins under her old pale skin, which had been notable to begin with, rose to the surface, bulging as her wings beat. Soon they were joined by her red arteries protruding from her face like lines on the bark of a tree. Brendan thought she might explode. You, Dahlia said, turning to Cordelia, you stole from my library. I was just borrowing. A gust of wind knocked Cordelia against a wall. The contents of the room were swirling in a spiral now. Pizza box, cups of soda, menu, TV remote. Brendan had to clutch the sofa to stay upright. "For the honour of my father," Dahlia Christoph howled. "For all the evil done to him by the Walkers. For the disturbance of the great book. For the craven consultation with Dr. Hayes. For Denver Christoph, who lives again as he lives always. A life for a life. The Wind Witch has spoken." Slam. The shutters closed on the living room windows. Brendan heard them slam in the kitchen and library too. Then the glass coffee table rose and hurled toward him. He ducked it, but it spun toward Mrs. Walker. She was kneeling, praying. It smacked her in the head. "Mum!" Brendan yelled. His mother hit the floor, covered in broken glass and bleeding from her forehead. "Get down!" Dr. Walker screamed to his children as he lunged toward his wife. But the Chester chair got him, the same one that he'd been sleeping in that afternoon, hitting his skull with a nauseating crack. The Wind Witch, that's what she called herself. The Wind Witch has spoken. She blew Mr. and Mrs. Walker into a corner. They lay unconscious against each other. The foundations of Christoph House began to shake. Brendan wondered if it would tip over and slide into the ocean. The television tilted up and flew at him. The TV shattered on the wall behind, sending shards of plastic whirling around. "Nell, close your eyes!" Brendan's younger sister was curled into a ball. Books were flying into the room now from the library, clobbering Brendan and his sisters, attacking like the terrible birds in an old movie he'd seen. Each time a book neared him, its pages open and fluttering, he could hear voices inside, gibbering in aged accents, demanding to be released. "Deal!" Brendan called. All he cared about was surviving and making sure his family survived. His parents were unconscious on the other side of the room. He couldn't help them at the moment. He couldn't see Cordelia. The wind was all-consuming, and debris blinded him to everything. He squeezed his eyes shut, rubbed them and forced them open. Right in front of him floated 3 books, leather volumes that suddenly seemed to grow, expanding from hardcover size to almanac to encyclopedia. Just impossible. Brendan screamed, but he could no longer even hear himself. The room was larger, the ceiling 20 minutes from the floor and rising every second. The Wind Witch rose to the ceiling and stared down like an avenging angel sent by the wrong side. The one last thing entered the room, the bookshelves from the library, massive, sickeningly heavy. Even without the books, they slid in one after another, levitating higher, 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 swirling in an apex above and crashing down. And then all was black and silent. I'm going to stop there. It's a tremendous book. The children meet a giant, they meet warriors, they meet massive creatures. It's very, very exciting. Oh, pirates, they meet pirates. It's very exciting. It is a little bit scary. It's a little bit intense in places. I wouldn't recommend it for children under year 4, certainly. It is okay in the end, I promise you. I would never recommend a book if I didn't know that it was okay in the end. If you do decide to read it, Bexley Library has copies you can borrow online at the moment. We have copies in the book barn. This is my copy. Ask me, I'll quite happily lend it to you. There are actually 3 books, but I think this one was my favourite, personally. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you have a great World Book Day, and I look forward to seeing you all at school next week. Have a great weekend, folks. Bye-bye.